All right, class. Settle down.
You suck, Professor.
Settle down. We're getting started. So, you want to know how to get into movies. Well, seems like an easy question, right? With an easy answer. Just watch movies. You want to get into movies? Watch movies. You know, I mean, you can read all you want about the studio system, the French New Wave, or any period or person in movie history, but ultimately you gotta watch the movies, right? So just go watch movies. Lesson over. Wait, that's not enough? All right, I do have a lesson planned, so let's go through this. Okay, so I have two main tracks of advice, along with some smaller pieces we'll get to later. They are self-discovery, lists, and then we'll go over the rest later. Self-discovery. Let's talk about how you can use a single entry point into film and then expand from there. You know, you have a movie you really like, and you know, you want more like that movie. So you find more movies like that movie and you expand. You just go off in different directions. That seems easy in concept, but how do you do it in the particular? So let me give you my personal story. So I started out, like a lot of men in my generation, a lot of boys in my generation, by loving Star Wars.
Red 5, I'm going in.
I'm an older millennial. I was born in '85, and so Star Wars was just kind of the VHS that was present in the house and the one that I gravitated towards most. Star Wars and Indiana Jones, those two series, loved them both. And they really kind of ignited the idea that televisual entertainment could be exciting. And so, Star Wars. Boom! Star Wars. So, when it comes to kind of any movie you decide to discover through, you can go in generally two directions. You can go forward. You can see what Star Wars inspired. You can see the terrible Italian ripoffs like Star Crash. You can see the, embrace of franchise filmmaking that Hollywood took over the course of the next 50 years. Or you can go back. I don't know why the stuff forward never interested me that much. What interested me was going back. And a lot of that has to do with my mother and Roger Ebert. No, I never knew Roger Ebert. What I had was a book of Roger Ebert's reviews. My mother had a copy of a book of 500 of his reviews on her shelf. And so when I discovered that Roger Ebert had written a 4-star review of Star Wars and a 4-star review of Return of the Jedi, I consumed those reviews, along with reviews of things like Indiana Jones and any other movie that I enjoyed. And Roger Ebert provided a key piece of information. George Lucas was heavily inspired by Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. Boom, old DVD copy. So what did I do? I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. I got a copy, probably from the library, and I watched it. And, it's a real bit of culture shock going from Star Wars, which is, late 70s, sci-fi, its DNA is extremely obvious in everything that came after. And then going back to a 1950s black and white Japanese movie in subtitles that has the same basic narrative bones and still entertains me. It's eye-opening in a way that a lot of these sorts of experiences aren't. I was 12, 13 years old and I discovered firmly that old black and white foreign films that I have to read can be entertaining. And that opened up a world. Now, I'm not going to say by the time I was like 15, I was some giant movie nerd. I was still largely contained in my preferred little bubble of Star Wars that evolved into a bubble of The Lord of the Rings. However, I was open to more. And so with The Hidden Fortress, I was open to more things like The Hidden Fortress. And that ultimately came down to Seven Samurai and Yojimbo. These are kind of the big daddies of Kurosawa's career. The Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo. Those, out of all of the movies Kurosawa made, you've probably heard of at least one of those three, and probably not a whole lot more. And that openness to black and white, sometimes very long, Seven Samurai is 3.5 hours long, very long foreign films was formative. I was open to anything old. And it got to such a point that my mother one day came home from the library. I was maybe 16 years old, and she brought home a copy of The Seventh Seal. It's in here somewhere. And I watched it. Did I get The Seventh Seal when I was 16 years old? No, I didn't. What I had was Roger Ebert in his review explaining Seventh Seal to me. And I sort of got it because of him. I've since revisited it a few times, and I love the movie. It's its own thing, and I love it. But you can see how just my one entry point, along with a mixture of some guidance and some self-discovery on my part, led me to go from Star Wars to The Seventh Seal. That's quite a gap. And in that time, I'm exposing myself to things like silent comedies, to the French New Wave, to 50s Golden Age Hollywood stuff, to 50s independent Hollywood stuff. It's exploding open. And what really changed things in terms of scale, I went from at 19 thinking I knew everything about movies to realizing I knew almost nothing about movies because of Netflix. I still have a couple of these. They let you keep them when they ended the service. And yeah, I had this from the time I was 20 until they shut it down a couple of years ago. And I saw so many movies through this service. For the longest time, I was on the 3 movie at a time plan. And what that ended up meaning in a practical sense was that I would get a movie, watch it that night, return it, and the next day I would get another movie, watch it that night, and return it. And so just the cycle of the mail meant that I got a new movie every single day, and no matter what it was, I watched it. I wasn't in the mood, but I watched it, and because I was investing my time, I did everything I could to enjoy it. I don't go into movies wanting to be miserable. I go into movies wanting to enjoy them. And I try to engage with the film on the level that it's at. And it works, it doesn't work, it happens. But the Netflix experience where I created a list of roughly 400 movies that I would add to every once in a while, and then I would never manipulate the order of them, and I would just get movies I'd put on there 2 or 3 years earlier. And suddenly I have to watch it that night, and I have to try to enjoy it and move on. It taught me how to discover movies on my own. It's like, oh, this seems interesting. Oh, that seems interesting. And, oh, I liked that movie. Let's get more of him, in the future. Oh, I like this kind of movie. Let's get more of that kind in the future. And I would eventually come around to it. And this self-discovery was incredibly helpful. I was open to everything. I'm still open to everything. Last night I went and saw Wicked for Good. Did I have actual interest in seeing Wicked for Good? No, but my wife wanted to see it, so I'm not going to turn down an opportunity to go to the movies. I went and saw it. I tried. I was kind of miserable through the whole thing, but I tried. All right, so that advice is, I think, of a limited appeal. A lot of people are going to hear that and be like, I don't know where to go from Captain America, the Winter Soldier. My favorite Marvel movie. Where do I go from here? I mean, all you can go from here is more Marvel movies. And I've seen all the more Marvel movies. I've seen the DC movies. I've seen all the comic book movies. What am I supposed to do when I go from here? And that represents the kind of danger of self-activation, because you can end up in loops. So if this is your favorite movie and you want more like it, and all you can think of is more comic book movies, then you're just going to end up in this surprisingly small bubble. It's been very dominant over the last 15, 20 years. But outside of that 15, 20 years, there's not that much. And comic book movies may not be the reason you actually like this movie all that much. So if you go from this to Thor, you know, it's going to be like, okay, they're not that similar. But if you're going to go from this to the Parallax View, or from this to the Day of the Jackal, or from this to 3 Days of the Condor, or from this to the Manchurian Candidate, suddenly you're in a completely different era that feels like this without giant action spectacle. And you're watching movies from 50 years ago that may interest you. And suddenly the idea of an old movie is a little less terrifying. Because yeah, movies are old, but the Parallax View is awesome. That sort of thing. And so, I mean, it requires a certain level of understanding of film history. It requires a certain level of guidance. So this is where I think critics are useful. Don't have a whole lot of use for critics right now. I don't read them that much because I don't need critics to tell me if I'm interested in a film or not, or why I like or dislike a movie. I can figure that out on my own. I have a strong enough vocabulary and grammar around how movies are built and what I like about them to be able to explain it myself. So I don't really need critics that much. But for those of you like starting out, critics are actually a good source because they generally do know more about movies than you, and they can highlight connections. They can tell you why they think movies are good or bad. And if you agree with that, it helps you build your vocabulary and your grammar around discussing how movies work. All right, so that self-starting thing is of some use. And I have another piece of advice. So let's reset. And let's talk about lists. The film industry has existed for more than 100 years. People have been talking about movies for more than 100 years, and people have been making lists of movies for more than 100 years. There is no shortage of lists of movies. You can just get lists of movies from all over the place. I have a bunch of lists that you can look through. However, you know, it's like just find a list and explore it is as daunting as find a movie and find its connections. So let's think about what lists there are. As I said, there are a bunch of lists. There's the BFI Sight and Sound poll. It's a once-a-decade list starting in 1952. The most recent was in 2022. It's a very good list of movies. However, it is very European and art house focused, so it may be of limited use to people who are just starting out, unless you like want to discover Antonioni as your first entry into serious cinema. The Best Picture winners at the Oscars is actually a really interesting and quite good list. I don't love everything that won Best Picture. There's some stuff in there that I genuinely dislike. But overall, it's actually quite a good list. It's not a great history of movies, though. It's more of a history of Hollywood's perception of itself. Again, there's a lot of really good stuff on there, but I feel like it's more like something to do in the future when you kind of have, you know, stronger legs under you. The list I would recommend is the AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies list, especially the one they released in 1998. They've released two, one in 98 and one in 2008. I prefer slightly the 1998 one. And I just think it is a very solid list of movies that's going to get you so many highlights over the course of 100 years and 100 movies. And I say 100 years, 100 movies because the movies really started in 1898. The very earliest movie on that list is from 1915, because industrially, Hollywood didn't really become a force until really the 20s, with Irving Thalberg kind of revamping how things were done in MGM. But it really kind of was birthed in America as a commercial enterprise in the 1910s. Anyway, and I think it's actually a really good list, where the BFI Sight and Sound poll is very kind of art house European. The AFI list is very American, and it's surprisingly populist. Number 100 on it is Yankee Doodle Dandy. This is a Michael Curtiz biopic of a song and dance man starring Jimmy Cagney, who's playing against type, and it's fun musical spectacle. Would it be top 10 of Michael Curtiz's entire career? Maybe. This movie's really good, but it's this is just populist entertainment. This isn't serious cinema. This is just populist entertainment, and it's fun. Sure, maybe you need to know a bit of film history to realize that Cagney was playing against type. His performance in White Heat is what he was known for, and then Yankee Doodle Dandy is completely different. And it's something to know, but ultimately you don't need that to enjoy Yankee Doodle Dandy. So I do think the AFI list is a really good place to start. So I would highly recommend starting that. But then, how do you start? Do you just go from 1 to 100? Because that falls into the trap of, oh no, Citizen Kane is number 1. Citizen Kane is number 1, and if I don't love this movie, I'm defective, or this movie sucks, or this whole experiment is not worthwhile because I didn't love the greatest movie ever. First of all, push that out of your mind. You're just watching movies to enjoy them, not to fall in with a crowd. All right? Because that trap is so easy to fall into and so many have fallen into it, I would recommend not going in the ranking order. If you're going to do the ranking order, I would actually go reverse. Start with Yankee Doodle Dandy at 100 and go up instead of Citizen Kane and going down. However, I think the more interesting way to approach it would be chronologically. So, you could go from oldest to newest, but let's talk about that real quick. Oldest on that list is The Birth of a Nation. Now, this does not appear on the 2008 list for a reason. They replaced it with Intolerance, D.W. Griffith's apologia for this film. Sort of apologia. This movie is great. It's exciting. It's fun. It's also hilariously racist. And so if you start your cinematic journey with this, if you start in chronological order with this, you have a 3-hour silent film that is so racist, I think it's actually a parody of racism. It's not. Griffith meant it earnestly, but that's a lot of hurdles to jump to just get into. And similarly to Citizen Kane not being the greatest movie ever and you just liking it a bit, it's going to impede your ability to move forward. So I wouldn't start in forward chronological order. I would start in reverse chronological order. And reverse chronological order is 3 films. It is Fargo, it is Forrest Gump, and it is Pulp Fiction. I imagine you've seen at least one of these, maybe all 3. Now, why would I recommend you start your cinematic journey with films you've already seen? That makes no sense. Why I recommend it is to ease you into it. Okay, so these are movies that you know. I think the actual order would be Fargo, Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump. I think. These were released the same year. You start with Fargo. It is more modern. It's only 30 years old. And, it's a black comedy. It's familiar. You're going to get into it. You will watch it one day and you're like, all right, that was easy. I watched something I know. I watched something I enjoyed. And then you watch Pulp Fiction. You're like, oh, I know this movie. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't like it, but it's familiar. And, this is a cinematic journey and I can dip my toe into something I like or don't like if it's familiar, and I can move on. And then you go with Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is a huge crowd pleaser. I call it Boomer the movie. And, most people like this movie a lot. Most people love this movie. I think it's pretty good. It's not my favorite Robert Zemeckis film. But suddenly, you have 3 movies under your belt. All of them are modern. All of them you probably know to a certain extent. And you're 3 movies in. You take 1 a week, 2 a week, a week and a half in, you've watched 3 of these movies, and you can just keep going. And it starts this journey backwards, where you're going from the familiar to the unfamiliar, so that in the end, if you made it all the way to the end, you've watched cinema, might say devolve, might say refine, I'm not sure, until finally you're hitting Birth of a Nation at the very end, after you've watched Charlie Chaplin movies, after you've watched Citizen Kane, after you have 99 other movies under your belt that have given you a different perspective about how movies work. So yeah, so those are my 2 big pieces of advice. Don't be afraid of self-starting, and use a list. I recommend the AFI 100 Years, 100 Movies list. It's not my favorite list, but I think it's a pretty good list. And, I think with those 2 pieces of advice, you'll be in good shape to just start exploring. Now, I have some smaller pieces of advice as well. The first is, don't turn off movies. Don't walk away from them. Engage with them. Continue to engage with them. Keep watching them all the way through. It's not that common where 30 minutes into a movie, I know I'm not going to like it, and I suddenly love it by the end. However, there are times when the final 5 minutes or so I find worthwhile. William Friedkin's The Guardian is an example. I think the movie is largely boring, but the last 5 minutes are amazing, and I love the last 5 minutes, and I'm glad I stuck through it to the end. It's a hard lesson to learn because, you know what, if your point of your cinematic journey is to discover cinema, you have to watch the bad stuff too. Not everything is great. If you only watch the great films, you don't actually have a point of comparison about what things get done right and what things get done poorly. And it's going to affect your ability to actually talk about the movies. It's going to affect your ability to explain why you actually like the movies that you do. And so, watching crappy B movies from the 50s, you're going to find stuff to actually enjoy, but a lot of it is going to be just kind of boring. And you kind of got to stick with it when you get there, because that's just part of learning cinema. Not everything is going to be exciting every moment. And if you turn off things because it's not exciting every moment, well, you know what? You're going to be turning off stuff that actually will engage you, but it didn't hit you right in that very moment. The second piece of advice is going to be hard. Don't let mood affect you. How many times have I seen people write that, I would have liked this movie, but I wasn't in the mood for that type of movie. So I'm going to watch it again when I'm in the right kind of mood, and maybe I'll like it more. This is something that people get into. It's like, I want a thriller and I got a drama. It may be a good drama, but I wanted a thriller. And, I sort of get it to a certain extent, but I've seen so much in just kind of random orders, kind of irrespective of my mood, that I've actually just learned how to enjoy anything that comes along. Musical, drama, comedy, thriller, whatever, I'm open to exploring any of it at any time. I don't need to be in the mood. And I think I'm weird in that way, but it's something that I highly recommend you kind of work through. And part of that is don't turn off the movies. Stick with it. Actively try to engage with the films. When you actively try to engage with the films, it's no longer this passive thing of, okay, entertain me. It is this active, okay, what are you doing? I'm trying to meet you halfway. I'm trying to figure out what you're doing. And so that active engagement is actually a very important part of just enjoying movies. You've got to be open and reach out yourself as an audience. It's like, what are you doing? The work isn't entirely on the part of the filmmaker. 99% of the work is on the filmmaker's part to bring everything together. The 1% is you just engaging with it. Is you saying, okay, you've put in all the work. Let me try to get on your wavelength. And the third piece of advice is trying to figure out what the filmmaker is actually trying to do. Filmmakers are not always successful. They are often failures. And they are failures not because they don't meet your expectations. They're failures because they fail to meet the promise that they set up for themselves. And, so the ones who can operate at the highest levels are very rare, and they should be enjoyed and they should be celebrated. But it doesn't mean that the lower ones should be ignored. It means that the lower ones should be given the same benefit of the doubt when you start their films. It's like, oh no, this is by no name, I don't care, I'm not even going to try to engage it. It's open yourself. Maybe you'll find something that you didn't expect. And so openness, don't turn off the movie, and try to kill the in the mood thing. So if you want to learn how to watch movies, if you want to learn how to discover cinema, where do you start? I think I have hopefully given you a guide. Self-starting, lists, and really just try to engage with the films. Be open to them. You are going to get bored, you're going to get angry, but if you can stick with it, you're going to find so many treasures to enjoy. I can think of so many movies that I wholeheartedly love right now that 15-year-old me would have just rejected because they were slow, because they didn't have action in them. But my self-discovery, my use of other people, from critics to lists, and my decision to just engage with everything made me very open to the entire world of cinema, and I have found so much to love. And if you want to explore cinema like this, you have to have that openness. You have to have that self-starting attitude, and you probably need a guide. Use me, use Roger Ebert, use Vincent Canby, use Pauline Kael, use whoever, but find some guide through cinema. So, there's the lesson for today. Go. Explore.
This is the worst quantum physics class I've ever been in. I'm probably gonna drop.
Oh, this is the one you like. Yeah, it's a Genesis. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. It sounds like the one you've been singing forever. We too weak. I'm right. Like, it was like,